It was a Thursday evening, and the supermarket was starting to empty out. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the last few customers pushed their carts toward the checkout counters. Robert Hayes stood near the produce section, clipboard in hand, trying to look like he was checking inventory. But he wasn't really working. He was thinking. Robert was the CEO of a chain of grocery stores that had been in his family for 2 generations. His father had built the business from a single shop, and Robert had expanded it to 15 locations across the state. He was successful by any measure. Nice house, expensive car, respect in the community. But lately something had been bothering him. He felt disconnected from the actual work, from the people who made his stores run every single day. That's why he'd started doing these random visits. No announcement, no big entourage. Just him, showing up at different stores to see what was really going on. His managers hated it. They scrambled to make everything look perfect whenever they spotted him. But that wasn't the point. Robert wanted to see the truth, not some polished version of it. He glanced at his watch. Almost 7 in the evening. Most of the day shift workers would be clocking out soon. He walked slowly through the aisles, nodding at employees who recognized him. Some smiled nervously. Others quickly looked away and pretended to be busy. Robert understood. When the boss shows up, people get uncomfortable. As he passed the bakery section, he noticed a woman in a green employee vest standing near the discount rack. She was maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her name tag read Jennifer. Robert had seen her before during his visits. She was always quiet, always focused on her work. Never caused any problems. Never asked for anything. Jennifer was looking at the bread that had been marked down because it was expiring that day. The store's policy was clear about this stuff. Anything that hit its expiration date got pulled from the shelves. Some of it went to food banks, but a lot of it ended up in the dumpster. It was wasteful, Robert knew, but that's how the system worked. He watched as Jennifer glanced around nervously. Then she did something that made Robert pause. She picked up 3 loaves of bread, 2 containers of dented yogurt, and some bruised apples. She held them for a moment, then quickly stuffed them into her cloth shopping bag. Her hands were shaking slightly. Robert felt his chest tighten. Was she stealing? But these were expired items, things that would be thrown away anyway. Still, technically, taking anything without paying was against store policy. He'd fired people for less. The store manager, a stocky man named Phil, had apparently seen the same thing. He started walking toward Jennifer with that authoritative stride that managers use when they're about to confront someone. Robert could see exactly how this was going to play out. Phil would question her, probably embarrass her in front of other employees. Maybe even call security. Something inside Robert made him react. He quickly stepped forward and caught Phil's attention, shaking his head slightly. Phil looked confused but stopped in his tracks. Robert gestured for him to wait. The manager frowned but nodded and stepped back. Jennifer hadn't noticed any of this. She finished packing her bag, zipped it up, and walked quickly toward the back of the store where the employee break room was located. Robert could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her head down. This wasn't someone who felt good about what she was doing. Robert stood there for a moment, thinking. He could confront her right now. He could let Phil handle it. Or he could do something he'd never done before. He could follow her and find out why a seemingly good employee was taking expired food home. The rational part of his brain told him this was none of his business. But something else, something deeper, pushed him forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the disconnection he'd been feeling from real life. Or maybe it was just instinct telling him there was a story here that mattered. He walked to the back area and waited near the employee exit. A few minutes later, Jennifer emerged in her regular clothes, a worn blue jacket and jeans. She had the cloth bag slung over her shoulder, holding it close to her body like it contained something precious. Her face looked tired, really tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from more than just a long shift. Robert watched as she pushed through the exit door and stepped out into the cold evening air. He waited a few seconds, then followed. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Most employees had already left. Jennifer didn't head toward any of the cars. Instead, she walked straight past the lot and onto the sidewalk that ran along the main road. She was walking home. In this weather. Carrying expired food, Robert felt something twist in his stomach. He hurried to his car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Jennifer made in a year. He started the engine but kept his distance. Following slowly as she walked along the sidewalk, the neighborhood around the store was decent enough, mostly middle-class homes and small apartment buildings. But Jennifer kept walking, block after block, as the sun dipped lower and the air grew colder. Robert followed, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice him stop after about 15 minutes. The neighborhood started to change. The houses got smaller, more rundown. Some had broken fences and overgrown yards. The streetlights were dimmer here, and several were completely out. This was the part of town that Robert never really thought about, the area that existed just beyond the edges of his comfortable life. Jennifer pulled her jacket tighter and kept walking. Robert noticed she wasn't wearing gloves even though the temperature was dropping fast. His car's heater was running, keeping him warm and comfortable. While she trudged through the cold, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him felt guilty for following her like this, invading her privacy. But another part felt compelled to understand. Who was this woman? Why was she taking expired food? Where was she going? After another 10 minutes, Jennifer turned off the main road and onto a smaller street lined with old apartment buildings. The paint was peeling on most of them, and several had boarded up windows. She walked up to one of the buildings and stopped at the entrance, but she didn't go inside. Instead, she stood there, set down her bag, and waited. Robert pulled his car over about half a block away and watched. That's when he saw them. 3 kids came running out of the building. They were young, maybe between 6 and 10 years old. They wore jackets that looked too thin for the weather, and their faces lit up when they saw Jennifer. She knelt down and hugged them, all 3 at once, squeezing them tight like she hadn't seen them in years. Instead of just hours, then she opened her bag and pulled out the bread. The kids' eyes went wide. They each grabbed a piece and started eating it right there on the street. Like they hadn't eaten all day, Robert sat in his warm car and felt his heart break into pieces. He finally understood what he was seeing. This wasn't theft. This wasn't someone taking advantage of the system. This was a mother trying to feed her children with whatever she could find, and he had almost let his manager confront her. He had almost let the system punish her for trying to survive. Robert sat frozen in his car, watching the scene unfold in front of him. The 3 children were still eating the bread like it was the best meal they'd ever had. Jennifer stood there with her hand on the oldest child's shoulder, smiling at them with a mixture of love and sadness that Robert had never quite seen before. He should leave. He knew that. This was private, personal. He was intruding on a moment that wasn't meant for his eyes. But something kept him there, engine idling softly, hands gripping the steering wheel. He needed to understand more. He needed to know the full story. After a few minutes, Jennifer gathered the children and they started walking. Not into the apartment building where they'd met, but down the street. Robert waited a moment, then slowly followed again, keeping his distance. His expensive car felt even more out of place in this neighborhood. A few people on the street noticed it, watching with suspicious eyes. Rich people didn't come to this area unless they were lost or looking for trouble. The small family walked for another 5 minutes until they reached a playground. It wasn't much of a playground, really. The swings looked rusty, the slide had graffiti on it, and half the equipment seemed broken or unsafe. But the kids didn't seem to care. They ran toward the swings with the kind of pure joy that only children can have. Even when everything around them is falling apart, Jennifer sat down on a bench, setting her bag beside her. She pulled out the yogurt containers and the apples, dividing them carefully among the 3 children. Robert noticed how precise she was about it. Each child got exactly the same amount. Not a bite more or less. It reminded him of how his own mother used to divide dessert when he was young, making sure everything was fair. But his mother had been dividing cake and ice cream, not expired yogurt and bruised fruit. The oldest child, a girl with braided hair, brought her apple back to Jennifer and tried to give her half. Robert saw Jennifer shake her head and push it back toward the girl. The child argued for a moment, but Jennifer was firm. The kids would eat. She would be fine. Robert felt something burning behind his eyes. When was the last time he'd skipped a meal? He couldn't even remember. He ate at expensive restaurants, ordered takeout without looking at prices, threw away leftovers without a second thought. And here was a woman, his employee, watching her children eat. Expired food while she went hungry. He pulled out his phone and opened the company's employee database. It took him a minute to find Jennifer's file. Jennifer Walsh, age 34. Hired 3 years ago. Position, checkout clerk. Hourly wage, minimum. No raises, no promotions. Perfect attendance record except for 3 days last year. No disciplinary issues. Emergency contact, none listed. Robert stared at that last detail. No emergency contact? Most people listed a spouse, a parent, a sibling, someone. But Jennifer had left it blank. What did that mean? Was she completely alone in the world except for these 3 children? He scrolled through more information. Her address was listed as the apartment building he'd seen earlier. Unit 2C. He opened another app and looked up the building. The rent for a 2-bedroom unit there was $800 a month. On minimum wage, working 40 hours a week, Jennifer probably made around $1,500 a month before taxes. Maybe $1,200 after. Rent would take most of that. Then utilities, food, clothes for growing children, school supplies, transportation. The math was brutal. Robert had never really thought about it before. He knew minimum wage was low, but he'd always figured people could get by if they were responsible with money. Now, sitting in his car looking at the actual numbers, he realized how naive that was. There was no getting by. There was only struggling every single day, trying to keep your head above water. While the current kept pulling you down, the children finished eating and went back to playing. The youngest, a boy who couldn't have been more than 6, climbed onto the broken slide. Jennifer jumped up, watching him carefully, ready to catch him if the rusty equipment gave way. Even in a moment of play, she couldn't fully relax. She was always on guard, always alert to danger, always worried about the next disaster that might strike. Robert thought about his own children. He had 2, a boy and a girl, both in private school. They had tutors, music lessons, sports teams. They ate organic food and wore name-brand clothes. They complained when the Wi-Fi was slow or when they didn't get the exact birthday present they wanted. And he'd raised them to think that was normal. That everyone lived like that, but everyone didn't live like that. Most people didn't. And some people, like Jennifer and her children, were living in a completely different world just a few miles away from his comfortable home. The sun was almost completely down now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Jennifer called to the children, and they reluctantly left the playground. Robert watched as they walked back toward the apartment building, the kids holding hands. Jennifer carrying the empty bag that had held their dinner. He followed one last time. Packing across the street as they entered the building. Through a first-floor window, he could see them climbing a dark stairwell. The lights inside were dim, and some seemed to be burned out. Jennifer had to use her phone's flashlight to see the steps. Robert sat there for a long moment, not sure what to do next. He could leave right now, go home to his warm house and his comfortable life, try to forget what he'd seen. A lot of people would do that. They'd tell themselves it wasn't their problem, that they couldn't save everyone, that this was just how the world worked. But Robert couldn't shake the image of those 3 children, eating expired bread on a cold street corner. He couldn't forget the way Jennifer had refused to take even a bite of that apple, making sure her kids had everything while she had nothing. He got out of his car and walked toward the apartment building. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. He just knew he needed more information, more context. He needed to understand the full picture before he could figure out how to help. The building's front door was propped open with a brick. Inside, the hallway smelled like old cooking grease and cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was peeling in places, and water stains marked the ceiling. Robert climbed the stairs, careful not to trip in the dim light, until he reached the second floor. Unit 2C was at the end of the hall. He stood outside for a moment, listening. He could hear children's voices inside, muffled but happy. They were laughing about something. Despite everything, despite the poverty and the struggle and the expired food, they were laughing. Robert raised his hand to knock, then stopped. What would he say? Hi, I followed you home from work because I saw you taking expired bread? That would terrify her. She'd think he was there to fire her, or worse, instead. He walked back down the hall and knocked on Unit 2A. After a moment, an elderly man opened the door. He looked at Robert with tired, suspicious eyes. Yeah? The man said. I'm sorry to bother you, Robert said, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. I'm a friend of your neighbor, Jennifer Walsh. I'm trying to get in touch with her, but I think I have the wrong number. Do you know her? The old man's expression softened a little. Jennifer? Sure, I know her. Good woman, quiet, keeps to herself mostly. How long has she lived here? Robert asked. About 2 years, I think. Maybe a bit more. She's got those 3 kids. Cute kids. Always polite when I see them in the hall. Does she live alone with them? Is there a husband or... The old man shook his head slowly. Nah, it's just her. Was a husband at one point, I think. Heard he passed away. Tragic thing. She works hard, that one. Sometimes I see her leaving at 5 in the morning, coming back after dark. Those kids are alone a lot, but they're good kids. Never cause trouble? Robert felt his stomach sink. She leaves at 5 in the morning? Sometimes earlier. I think she works more than one job. Has to, right? This ain't a cheap city, even in this neighborhood. Robert thanked the man and walked back to his car. His mind was racing. Jennifer worked at his store, but that was just one job. Where else did she work? How many hours was she putting in every week? And when did she sleep? When did she have time to be with those children who clearly adored her? He sat in his car and pulled up Jennifer's work schedule on his phone. She worked the afternoon shift at his store, 3 to 9, 5 days a week. That was only 30 hours. Not even full-time? He'd never thought about why some employees weren't scheduled for 40 hours. It saved the company money on benefits. Simple business logic, but now that logic felt cruel. Jennifer probably had another job in the mornings, maybe cleaning offices or working at a warehouse. She was probably putting in 60 or 70 hours a week between 2 jobs, and still barely making enough to keep a roof over her children's heads and expired bread in their stomachs. Robert started his car and drove away, but his mind stayed in that rundown apartment building. He'd come here looking for answers, and he'd found them. But now he had a bigger question. What was he going to do about it? Robert drove home in silence. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't make any phone calls. He just drove through the darkening streets, his mind replaying everything he'd seen over and over again. His house was in a neighborhood that couldn't have been more different from where Jennifer lived. Large homes with perfectly manicured lawns. 3-car garages. Security systems on every door. The kind of place where people worried about property values and homeowner association rules. Not about whether their children would eat dinner. He pulled into his driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at his house. It was beautiful, he had to admit. 2 stories, colonial style, with white columns and a wraparound porch. His wife had decorated it with expensive furniture and original artwork. They had a pool in the backyard that they barely used. 4 bedrooms for a family of 4. Robert walked inside and was immediately hit with the smell of dinner. Something Italian, probably pasta. His wife, Catherine, was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. You're late, she said, but there was no anger in her voice. I was starting to worry. Sorry, Robert said. Got caught up at one of the stores. Well, dinner's almost ready. The kids already ate. They have homework to finish? Robert nodded and walked upstairs. His son Daniel was in his room playing video games on a massive television. His daughter Lisa was across the hall, FaceTiming with friends while scrolling through her phone. Both of them were warm, safe, fed, completely absorbed in their own teenage worlds. He stood in the hallway between their rooms and thought. about Jennifer's 3 children eating bread on a street corner. The contrast was so sharp it physically hurt. "Dad, are you okay?" Daniel had paused his game and was looking at him with concern. Robert realized he'd been standing there staring into space. "Yeah, buddy. I'm fine. How was school?" "Boring. Can I get the new PlayStation game that comes out next week?" "How much is it?" $60. Robert thought about how $60 was probably what Jennifer had left after paying rent and utilities. $60 might be groceries for a week, or new shoes for one of her kids, or medicine if someone got sick. And his son wanted to spend it on a video game he'd play for a few weeks before getting bored. "We'll see," Robert said, and walked back downstairs. Dinner with Catherine was quiet. She talked about her day, about the charity luncheon she'd attended, about the neighbor who was renovating their kitchen. Robert barely heard her. He pushed food around his plate, thinking about Jennifer pushing that apple back toward her daughter, refusing to take even one bite. "Robert, you're not eating," Catherine said. "Is something wrong?" He looked up at her. Catherine was a good person. She volunteered, she donated to charity, she cared about important causes. But she lived in the same bubble he did. She had no idea what life was really like for most people. "Have you ever thought about what it would be like to be poor?" he asked suddenly. Catherine looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean really poor. Like choosing between paying rent and buying food. Like working 2 jobs and still not having enough." She set down her fork. "Where is this coming from?" Robert almost told her everything. About following Jennifer, about the children, about the expired bread. But something stopped him. He wasn't ready to talk about it yet. He needed to process it himself first. "Just something I saw today," he said. "Made me think." Catherine reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You have a good heart, Robert. That's one of the things I love about you. But you can't save everyone. You run a business, you employ hundreds of people, you do your part, do I?" Robert thought, "Do I really?" That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Catherine slept peacefully beside him. His mind wouldn't shut off. It kept showing him images. Jennifer's tired face. The children's eyes lighting up at the sight of bread. The dark stairwell in that apartment building. The empty emergency contact field in her employee file. Around 2 in the morning, he got up and went to his home office. He opened his laptop and started pulling up information. First, Jennifer's complete employment record. Then he started looking at other employees, comparing wages, looking at patterns. What he found made him sick. Jennifer wasn't an exception. She was the rule. Most of his employees were making minimum wage or barely above it. They worked 30 to 35 hours a week, just enough that the company didn't have to provide health insurance or other benefits. It was legal. It was standard practice in the retail industry. But it was wrong. Robert had always known these numbers existed. He'd approved budgets that included these wage structures, but he'd never really thought about what they meant in human terms. He'd never imagined the real people behind the spreadsheets. The families trying to survive on these wages, the children going hungry while their parents worked themselves to exhaustion. He pulled up the company's profit reports. Last year, his chain of stores had made $18 million in profit. $18 million. He'd been proud of that number. It meant growth, success, security for the business. But now that number felt obscene. He started doing math. If he gave every minimum wage employee a $2 raise, it would cost the company about $3 million a year. That would cut profits significantly, but the business would still be healthy. More than healthy. And those $2 extra an hour could be the difference between hunger and food, between eviction and stability, between desperation and hope, but it wasn't that simple. He had investors to answer to. A board of directors, shareholders who expected maximum returns. They wouldn't understand why he was voluntarily cutting profits to pay workers more than the market required. They'd say he was being emotional, impractical, bad at business. Robert closed his laptop and rubbed his eyes. The sun was starting to come up. He'd been awake all night, and he still didn't have answers. He only had more questions. He thought about his father, who'd started the business. His father had known every employee by name. He'd gone to their weddings, sent flowers when their children were born, showed up at funerals. But that was when there were only 30 employees. Now there were over 500 spread across 15 stores. Robert couldn't possibly know all of them personally, but he knew Jennifer now. He knew her story, or at least part of it, and he couldn't unknow it. He couldn't go back to looking at employees as just numbers on a spreadsheet. She'd become real to him in a way that changed everything. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Phil, the store manager. Need to talk to you about an employee situation. That checkout girl was seen taking expired items yesterday. Should we write her up or terminate? Robert stared at the message for a long time. This was the moment. He could let company policy take its course. Jennifer would be fired, or at minimum have a formal warning on her record. She'd probably be too scared to ever take food again, even food that was going to be thrown away. Her children would go hungrier. She might lose her apartment. The kids might end up in foster care. All because she'd tried to feed them with bread that the store was going to trash anyway, or he could do something different. Something that might not make business sense, but made human sense. Robert typed back, "Don't do anything yet. I'll handle this personally when I come in today. And Phil, I want a full report on our food waste and donation policies. I'm thinking about making some changes." He sent the message and stood up from his desk. Through the window, he could see his neighborhood waking up. Lights coming on in expensive houses. People starting their comfortable days. And somewhere across town, Jennifer was probably already awake. Getting ready for her first job? Making sure her children had something to eat before she left them alone for another long day, Robert made a decision. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew he couldn't do nothing. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. He couldn't go back to the comfortable ignorance he'd lived in before yesterday evening. He was going to help Jennifer. But more than that, he was going to figure out how to change the system that had failed her in the first place. It wouldn't be easy. It might even cost him his job if the board pushed back too hard. But for the first time in years, Robert felt like he was about to do something that actually mattered. He just had to figure out how to do it, right? Robert arrived at the store at 8 in the morning, much earlier than usual. The early shift employees looked surprised to see him. He nodded at them and went straight to his temporary office in the back. A small room usually reserved for managers doing paperwork. He called his assistant, Rachel, and asked her to pull files on every employee in the company. Wage information, work history, performance reviews, everything. She sounded confused but agreed to have it all compiled by the afternoon. Then he called the head of human resources, a woman named Patricia who'd been with the company for 15 years. "Patricia, I need you to look into something for me," Robert said. "We have an employee assistance program, right? Some kind of emergency fund?" "Yes, we do," Patricia said. "It was set up about 10 years ago. Employees can apply for emergency financial help in cases of medical bills, family crisis, things like that." "How many people have used it in the past year?" There was a pause. "Let me check." He heard typing. According to this, only 4 people applied last year. 3 were approved. 4 people? Out of 500 employees? That's correct? Robert felt frustration building. Why so few? Are people just not having emergencies, or do they not know about it? Well, Patricia said carefully, the application process is fairly complex. It requires documentation, approval from multiple managers, and there's a committee review. It usually takes about 6 weeks to process. 6 weeks? If someone has an emergency, they can't wait 6 weeks. I understand, but we need proper documentation to prevent fraud and abuse of the system. Robert rubbed his forehead. Right, okay, I want you to simplify that process. Make it easier to apply, faster to approve, and I want every single employee to receive information about it, not buried in some handbook nobody reads. Real communication? That will require board approval for any policy changes. Then schedule an emergency board meeting for next week. I'll deal with them. After he hung up, Robert sat back in his chair. This was going to be harder than he thought. Every positive change he wanted to make was blocked by policies, procedures, committees. Things designed to protect the company's money, not to help people. He heard a knock on the door. Phil, the store manager, stuck his head in. "You wanted to see me?" Phil asked. "Come in." "Close the door." Phil sat down, looking nervous. Robert understood why. When the CEO shows up unannounced and asks for private meetings, people assume the worst. "Tell me about Jennifer Walsh," Robert said. Phil frowned. "The checkout clerk? What about her?" "You sent me a message this morning about her taking expired items." "Right, yes. I saw her do it yesterday. She was stuffing bread and other expired stuff into her bag. Technically, that's theft, even if it's going to be thrown away. Company policy is clear. Have you ever talked to Jennifer? Do you know anything about her situation?" Phil shrugged. "Not really. She's quiet, does her job, never complains. She's been here about 3 years, I think. She has 3 children. She's a widow. She works 2 jobs and still barely makes enough to pay rent. Those expired items she took? That was dinner for her kids?" Phil's expression changed. The confidence faded, replaced by something that looked like shame. "I didn't know that." "Of course you didn't. Because we don't ask. We don't care. We just enforce policies without thinking about why people might be breaking them. So what do you want me to do?" Robert leaned forward. "I want you to forget you saw anything. And I want you to help me change our food waste policy. Any food that's safe to eat but can't be sold, I want it available for employees who need it. No questions asked, no judgment, no paperwork. The health department has regulations about that kind of thing. Then we'll figure out how to do it legally. But we're going to do it." Phil nodded slowly. "Okay, is there anything else?" "Yes, I'm going to talk to Jennifer today. I'm going to offer her a different position, one with better pay and full-time hours. But I don't want her to feel singled out or embarrassed. Can you think of a way to make it seem natural? Like we're just recognizing her good work? We do have an assistant manager position opening up next month. Rodriguez is transferring to another store. Jennifer could be a good fit. She knows the store inside and out." "Perfect. Set that up. And Phil?" Robert waited until the manager met his eyes. "Start paying more attention to your employees. Learn their names, their stories. They're not just workers. They're people with lives and problems and families. Treat them that way." Phil left looking thoughtful. Robert hoped the message had landed. But he couldn't worry about that now. He had more work to do. Around noon, Jennifer came in for her shift. Robert watched her through the office window. She looked tired like she always did. She clocked in, put on her vest, and went to her register with her head down. She probably thought every day might be the day she got caught. The day she got fired, the day everything fell apart, Robert waited an hour before approaching her. He didn't want to pull her away from work right at the start of her shift. When he finally walked over, she was scanning groceries for an elderly customer, chatting pleasantly with him. "Jennifer, could I speak with you for a moment when you're done with this customer?" Her face went pale. "Of course, sir." Robert watched her hands shake slightly as she finished the transaction. The customer left, and Jennifer turned to him with fear in her eyes. "There's nothing to worry about," Robert said quickly. "I just wanted to talk to you about a job opportunity. Can you take a quick break?" She looked confused but nodded. They walked to the break room, which was empty at this hour. Robert gestured for her to sit down. "How long have you worked here, Jennifer?" 3 years, sir." "Almost 3.5, and you've never had any problems?" "Never been written up for anything?" "No, sir. I try to do my job well." Robert nodded. "That's what I thought. Your record is excellent. Perfect attendance except for a few days last year. Always on time, always professional. That's why I wanted to talk to you about a promotion." Jennifer stared at him. "A promotion?" "We have an assistant manager position opening up. It's full-time, 40 hours a week, with benefits including health insurance. The pay is significantly better than what you're making now. I think you'd be perfect for it. She looked like she might cry. I don't understand. Why me? Because you've earned it. You've been a dedicated employee for years. You show up, you work hard, you care about this place. Those are exactly the qualities we need in leadership. A tear rolled down Jennifer's cheek. She quickly wiped it away. I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting this. I thought you were going to fire me. Fire you? Why would you think that? She looked down at her hands. No reason. I guess I'm just used to expecting bad news instead of good news. Robert felt his heart break a little. This woman had been living in such fear, such constant stress, that a simple promotion made her cry. How long had it been since anything good had happened to her? The position starts in 3 weeks, Robert said. You'll need some training, but Phil speaks highly of you. He thinks you'll do great. Can I ask something? Jennifer said quietly. Of course. Why now? I've been here 3 years. Nobody ever noticed me before. Robert chose his words carefully. Sometimes it takes seeing someone in a different context to realize their value. Let's just say I recently gained a new perspective on how important every single person in this company is. Jennifer smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Robert had met her. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. To my family. Actually, Robert said, I think I have some idea. After Jennifer went back to work, Robert returned to his office and made more calls. He contacted the company's insurance provider and pushed them to expedite adding new full-time employees to the health plan. He called a local food bank and arranged for regular pickups of safe expired food from all his stores. He scheduled meetings with department heads to discuss wage increases across the board. It was exhausting. Every conversation revealed another obstacle, another policy, another reason why things couldn't change quickly. But Robert pushed through. He'd spent years making decisions that maximized profit. Now he was going to spend some time making decisions that maximized humanity. Late in the afternoon, Rachel brought him the employee files he'd requested. He spent hours going through them, looking at names and numbers that represented real people with real lives. Single parents working minimum wage. Elderly employees with no retirement savings. Young people trying to pay off student loans. All of them struggling in ways that Robert had never considered before. He found dozens of employees like Jennifer. Good workers, loyal, dedicated, barely surviving. And he started making a list of changes. Not just quick fixes, but real structural changes that would make a difference. His phone rang. It was the board chairman. Robert, I heard you're calling an emergency meeting. What's this about? It's about doing the right thing, Robert said. I'll explain everything at the meeting. The board isn't going to like anything that cuts into profits. Then I'll convince them. Or I'll make the changes anyway and deal with the consequences. Robert, be careful. You're talking about your job. I know, Robert said. But some things are more important than keeping my job. I'm finally starting to understand that. He hung up and looked out the window at the store. Employees were going about their work, customers were shopping, everything looked normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Not for Robert. He'd seen behind the curtain and he couldn't unsee it. He couldn't go back to being the kind of CEO who only cared about numbers on a spreadsheet. Tomorrow he'd face the board. Tomorrow he'd start the fight to change how the company treated its workers. But tonight, at least one employee would go home with hope instead of fear. At least one family would have a chance at something better. It was a start. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Robert spent the entire weekend preparing his presentation, running numbers, anticipating objections. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The board members were business people, investors, people who measured success in quarterly profits and shareholder returns, but Robert had something they didn't have. He had Jennifer's story, and he had dozens more just like it. Monday evening, Catherine found him in his office at home, surrounded by papers and spreadsheets. You've been working nonstop since Friday, she said. What's going on? Robert looked up at his wife. Remember when you asked me what was wrong at dinner last week? When I asked about poverty? She nodded. I saw something at work. An employee taking expired food home? I followed her. He held up his hand before Catherine could respond. I know that sounds bad, but I needed to understand. She has 3 kids. She's a widow. She works 2 jobs and still can't afford to feed them properly. Those expired items I saw her take? That was their dinner. Catherine sat down slowly. That's heartbreaking. It is. And it's my fault. Our fault. The company's fault. We pay minimum wage. We schedule people for just under full time so we don't have to give benefits. We maximize profits while our employees go hungry. He gestured at the papers spread across his desk. I've been going through our employee records. Jennifer isn't alone. There are dozens of people working for us who are struggling just like she is. So what are you going to do? Tomorrow I'm going to propose major changes to the board. Wage increases, better benefits, simpler access to emergency funds, food donation programs. Things that will cost us millions in profits but will actually help the people who make our business possible. Catherine was quiet for a moment. The board will fight you on this, I know. You could lose your job. I know that too. Robert looked at his wife. But I can't not do this. I can't go back to pretending I don't know what I know now. These are people, Catherine. Real people with families and dreams and problems. They're not just line items in a budget. Catherine reached across the desk and took his hand. Then I'm with you. Whatever happens. Robert felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Thank you. The next morning, Robert walked into the boardroom with his presentation loaded and his arguments prepared. The 8 board members were already seated, looking at him with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. The chairman, a man named Howard who'd been friends with Robert's father, cleared his throat. Robert, you've called us here on short notice. This better be important. It is, Robert said. He pulled up his first slide. I want to talk about our employees. For the next 30 minutes, Robert laid it all out. The wage structures that kept people in poverty, the scheduling practices that denied benefits, the emergency fund that nobody knew about or could access, the food waste while employees went hungry. He showed them numbers, statistics, real examples without using names. Then he showed them his proposal. A $2 across-the-board raise for all hourly employees. Full-time hours for anyone who wanted them. Immediate health insurance eligibility. A simplified emergency assistance program. A food donation system for all stores. This will cost us approximately $4 million annually, Robert said. That's a significant hit to profits, but it's the right thing to do. The room erupted. 3 board members started talking at once. Howard held up his hand for silence. Robert, we appreciate your compassion, Howard said carefully. But we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. We can't just give away millions of dollars because it feels good. It's not about feeling good, Robert said. It's about being decent human beings. We're making enormous profits while the people who actually do the work can't afford to eat. How is that acceptable? It's called capitalism, another board member said. We pay market wages. If people don't like it, they can work somewhere else. Can they? Robert challenged. Where? Every retail chain pays the same. Every warehouse, every service industry. The market wage is just a race to the bottom where everyone agrees to pay as little as possible. If we raise our wages, we'll be at a competitive disadvantage, someone else argued. Or we'll be leaders. We'll attract better workers, reduce turnover, build loyalty. Happy employees work harder, stay longer, care more. That has value too. The debate went on for an hour. Some board members were sympathetic but worried about precedent. Others were openly hostile to the idea. The financial officer kept bringing up shareholder value. The whole thing felt like hitting a brick wall over and over again. Finally, Howard called for a vote. The proposal failed 6-2. Robert wasn't surprised, but he was disappointed. Then I'm implementing what I can without board approval, Robert said. I'm restructuring the emergency fund. I'm starting the food donation program. I'm reviewing every employee for potential promotions and raises. The things I can do within my authority as CEO, I will do. Robert, Howard said quietly, don't make this a fight. The board can remove you if necessary. Then do it, Robert said. But I'm not backing down on this. He left the boardroom feeling defeated but determined. He couldn't do everything he wanted, but he could do something. And something was better than nothing. Over the next month, Robert worked tirelessly. He personally reviewed hundreds of employee files. He promoted 32 people, including Jennifer, who'd started her assistant manager training and was thriving. He simplified the emergency fund and made sure every employee received clear information about it. Applications went from 4 a year to 20 in the first month. He established the food donation program, partnering with local organizations. Employees could take home safe expired food, and anything else went to food banks. In the first month alone, they donated over 5,000 pounds of food that would have been thrown away. He couldn't give everyone a raise, not without board approval. But he found other ways to help. Flexible scheduling for parents, transportation assistance, childcare referrals. Small things that made big differences in people's lives, and he kept fighting with the board. Every meeting he brought up wages. Every quarterly report he showed them the benefits of investing in employees. Turnover was down. Customer satisfaction was up. Employees were more engaged, more productive. 6 months after that first board meeting, something unexpected happened. A major competitor announced they were raising their starting wage to match rising costs of living. Suddenly, Robert's stores were at a disadvantage. They were losing good employees to the competition. At the next board meeting, Howard brought up wages before Robert could. We need to discuss compensation, Howard said. We're losing people to our competitors. I think it's time to reconsider Robert's proposal. Robert could barely believe what he was hearing. The same board that had rejected his ideas was now bringing them up as their own. But he didn't care about credit. He cared about results. This time, the vote passed. Not the full amount Robert had originally proposed, but a significant increase. A $1.50 raise for all hourly workers, with a path to $2 within the year. Full-time status for anyone who'd been with the company more than 6 months. Better benefits. Better support. It wasn't everything Robert had wanted. But it was progress. Real, meaningful progress. A year after following Jennifer home that cold evening, Robert stood in the same store watching the evening shift change. Jennifer was there, now a full assistant manager, training a new employee. She looked different. Not just happier, though she was definitely that. She looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She saw Robert and waved. He waved back. He thought about her children, who were now in a better school district because Jennifer could afford to move to a better apartment. He thought about the other employees whose lives had improved because of the changes he'd pushed through. He thought about the families who'd received emergency assistance. The workers who'd taken home food instead of letting it go to waste. The people who now had health insurance for the first time in years. It hadn't been a complete revolution. The system was still broken in many ways. There was still poverty, still struggle, still inequality. But in this small corner of the world, things were better. Not perfect, but better. Robert had learned something important that night he'd followed Jennifer home. He'd learned that being a good CEO wasn't just about maximizing profits or pleasing shareholders. It was about recognizing the humanity in every person who worked for you. It was about understanding that behind every employee ID number was a real person with real struggles and real dreams. He'd learned that sometimes the most important business decision isn't the one that makes the most money. Sometimes it's the one that makes someone's life a little bit easier, a little bit better, a little bit more hopeful. And he'd learned that change, real change, doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small steps, in persistent effort, in refusing to give up even when the obstacles seem impossible. As Robert left the store that evening, he passed the food donation area they'd set up near the back. Several employees were there, carefully selecting items to take home. Nobody looked ashamed. Nobody looked scared. They just looked grateful, and Robert felt something he hadn't felt in years of business success and financial achievement. He felt like he'd actually made a difference. Not in a quarterly report or a stock price, but in people's lives. That night, he slept peacefully for the first time in months, because he finally understood what his father had known all along. Business wasn't just about making money. It was about taking care of people. And when you took care of people, everything else followed.